There's always something new at Corporate Governance Week. It's now the 7th edition being held here at the Mandarin Orchard, but new topics on the agenda include the changing business models along with changing governance, and also a special day on charities and governance. Now, Dr. Roger Barker from the United Kingdom Institute of Directors is now become a regular feature of Corporate Governance Week. As you've been coming to Singapore year in, year out for Corporate Governance Week, what impression are you getting from the outside looking in as to what sort of progress is being made? Where are we at in all the discussions?
I think that my impression is that Singapore is making a lot of progress. I think a lot of the institutional framework around corporate governance, the regulatory framework has come a long way. Of course, a country like Singapore has distinctive governance issues because the market is very dominated by family-controlled companies. And that creates a particular, I think, power dynamic in companies, makes it rather difficult for minority shareholders, the type of shareholders that SIAS represents. So that brings its own challenges, although it also has, of course, advantages. I mean, having a controlling shareholder can also bring a lot of stability and long-term perspective to a company. So there are challenges, but on the whole, I would say that the underlying trend is one of progress in corporate governance in Singapore.
Well, we only need to look at some overseas markets to see that Singapore's not the only one where there's still an area for development. And you only have to look at Wells Fargo in the United States, for example, which has been very much in the news for the way that it ran the ship. So how do we don't benchmark us against perfection, but comparing us to other countries around the world, the countries that you see and spend your time focusing on. How are we doing?
Well, I think within the region, within Asia and certainly within Southeast Asia, Singapore compares extremely favourably. I mean, you do have a very advanced financial system, financial regulation, and I think there's also a very professional ethos and good sort of business culture which exists in Singapore. I mean, we're talking at this conference a lot about trust and the type of business culture which exists within Singapore, where ethics, I think, matters a lot in business, particularly compared to other countries in the region. That, I think, is a real competitive strength. It means, I think, that foreign investors are much more willing, I think, to invest in Singapore, and as to see the risk of investment as being lower compared to other countries. I mean, I think each country around the world has its own governance challenges. I mean, in some respects, the United States has a very advanced corporate governance system, but there are issues there. There are issues there relating to whether its shareholders play an active role in governance, whether there are sort of short-termist pressures which are imposed on companies by capital markets. So, there are pros and cons there. And in my own country, in the UK, I think, there are some very positive features of our governance system. We have a very well-established corporate governance code. We have good relationships on the whole between institutional investors and companies. But we have had our scandals, we have had our problems. We had a big accounting scandal a couple of years ago with our largest supermarket, Tesco, involved in that. So, and of course, during the financial crisis, our banks were severely affected. So, I think corporate governance everywhere is a work in progress, and Singapore has its own challenges. But I would say I'd give them a good scorecard.
All right. Finally, when we look at the politics around the world, we've seen a lot of rejection of the establishment. We saw it in the UK with Brexit, a rejection of the mainstream view that the UK should be a member of the EU. Yeah. Donald Trump's support, you love him or hate him, the fact is he's got a lot of support in the United States, again because of that authenticity, the rejection of the mainstream. To what extent should boards prepare themselves for a similar reaction at AGMs, that shareholders are not just going to wave through every resolution, but that they will also say, stop, what's the authentic view? What's really happening on the ground? Do you see some parallels there?
Yeah, I think there is a parallel there. I think, in the past, perhaps we've worked with this model that the board of directors is there to make the decisions. Yes, you've got to select the right people, but then leave it to them. They're the people who have the expertise, who are going to make the decisions. I think we're moving past that world now, actually. I think that people aren't prepared to just accept that. I mean, of course, we need high quality boards, absolutely. But what there is a need for increasingly, I think, is external input and transparency to allow external input into decision making. So shareholders want to have a bigger role. They want to understand what's going on in the company. They want to understand what directors are doing. And other stakeholders also want to play a role. And that, I think, is kind of creating a change in the kind of power dynamic of companies. It is much more about being open, transparent. It is now about involving other stakeholders more, and that's affecting companies in all sorts of ways. The way they communicate, the way they disclose, the way they appoint and nominate their directors, and the process that they go through in order to do that. And like it or lump it, it isn't just going to be anymore the kind of closed, smoke-filled boardroom which is going to make decisions about companies. It's going to be a more open process.
Yes, especially because here in Singapore, we're not allowed to smoke indoors. Thank you very much. Dr. Roger Barker, one of our special guests here at Corporate Governance Week 2016. As always, look around the video that you're currently watching to see other interviews and programs associated with the 7th Corporate Governance Week here in Singapore.